A man called Kurt Lodder once said, "Rewriting is a large part of any job. Get rid of stuff that's not working and just pare it down to a beautiful thing that you can hand in, probably late, to your client." This is converting a website to a new religion, Symphony. Who am I? My name is Michael Cullum. I'm a team member at a project called PHP, which I'll mention more in a minute. I am involved with Fig. I use Symfony quite a lot in freelancing. And there are my contact details. I'll be posting my slides up afterwards. So I mentioned I'm a team member at PHP. I'm actually a deputy website lead, and I also work a little bit on the core. Recently that involved, we had a very old website that was produced back in about 2007. And when I took over as deputy website lead, I looked at it and I said, this isn't working. This is a really old legacy application. It's not scalable, because essentially it turned into an enterprise-style website, but it was still built essentially on the back of PHP. It was using functions from PHP that weren't simply designed for a website. They were designed for bulletin board software. So we decided to build our website on Symfony. And that's sort of what my inspiration for this talk, and what I'm actually going to be following through and explaining how this actually worked in a practical situation. So what is the point in rewriting your application? What is the point in converting it into a Symfony application? What exactly are the benefits of doing so? The majority of people's code end up looking like this after a few years. And anyone who has been developing for a number of years, if you look at your coding style 6 years ago, it's very, very different to it is now. There have been massive changes in web development recently. And when you're working with code like this, you end up feeling a little bit like this. And it's spaghetti code. And it's an old architecture, it's an old coding style, and that's not what we want anymore, because this is a modern, because we want to use modern standards. We want to do things the right way, not this old way of spaghetti code and having functions everywhere and not even a class in sight. And the recent development of PHP have really, really helped us do this. How many people have files that have 1,000 lines of code in their project? How many people have front-facing files that have 1,000 lines of code in their... That's probably a legacy application. When you get to the stage where you've got so many lines of code, it's not organized, it's not easy to find things, and it's simply not maintainable anymore. We ended up with a file structure that looked like this. This was the root directory of PHP website when we actually decided to start moving stuff over to Symfony. It's absolutely huge. Each one of these folders is at least one page, if not a whole section of the site, which includes a whole load of other pages. And we had a whole load of pages in the root as well. And it's a lot more condensed file structure when you're actually using an application like Symfony or another framework using front controller. Another advantage is actually the reinventing the wheel scenario. Now, who's heard of the reinventing the wheel scenario concept? Yeah, exactly. So I'll go over this quite quickly. There are a variety of different content management systems you can use. There are a variety of different frameworks, etc. But the thing is, at PHP, we had our own database abstraction layer, we had our own templating engine, etc. And that isn't practical because there's no documentation for it. Quite often it's slow to develop with. You haven't got all of the community support behind you. Have a project that is actually dedicated to that. Template engine changes in PHP, the template engine might get touched once a month with a small little bug fix. Twig is releasing, has new releases every few months with a variety of features and other bits and bobs and bug fixes in it. The other advantage of this is that when you actually introduce new developers into your project, they're more likely to be aware of something. You can hire in Symfony developers, and already they have a basic grasp on how your application is laid out, how parts of it work. So we've decided that we need some change, but we haven't decided quite how we're going to do it yet. Things are bad in your application, but the problem with rewriting is that if you try and rewrite your entire application, you end up with lots and lots and lots of problems. Namely, you have two websites to maintain. If you've got an enterprise-style site, it can sometimes take 2, 3, sometimes even longer to actually rewrite your entire website, all of your web applications, small little projects you have, your site showcase, your portfolio, your contact forms, etc. It takes a long time to convert it all over. So you may think that rewriting is simply not an option. We can't maintain 2 sites at once. Not to mention the fact when you deploy an entire new site, how likely is it something is going to go wrong? Extremely likely when you're deploying so much code at once. So you've decided to use a framework. This is a very good idea. Who's heard of Composer? You're all Symfony developers. I really hope you have heard of Composer. Composer made a dramatic change in using frameworks. It suddenly became really, really easy to use third-party libraries. It suddenly became really, really easy to actually integrate use a framework and have all these different aspects. Frameworks will also provide a whole lot of interoperability. You find that they work with standards, the PSRs, so I work quite a bit with Fig, who has used PSRs or knows what they are. Yeah, exactly. For those that don't know what PSR is, they are standards recommendations produced by a group of frameworks and applications like PHP, Drupal, Symfony, Silex, etc. Or actually, no, Symfony left, I think. I'm getting a look that makes me think they have. And so that is most certainly a good choice. But then you've got to actually decide which framework you want, because there are loads and loads of frameworks to think of. And my actual title of the talk includes talks about them like religions. And the reason I say religions is sometimes a little bit of friction between them. They don't all agree on certain things. They have very different mantras, communities, concepts, and that makes a huge difference when you're actually choosing a framework. You've got so many: CodeIgniter, Laravel, KPHP, Zend, and of course the king of frameworks, Symfony. So we've decided on Symfony. If I'm having to explain to you why you should be choosing Symfony, I'm not quite sure why you're here. So converting the actual site. The single most important thing is this: doing it one piece at a time. One piece at a time. If you do your entire application at once, it won't work. It'll never get finished. You'll be demotivated. When you deploy it, it's going to have hundreds of breaks, especially with an enterprise-style application like PHP website or the PHP or Drupal. Look at how long it's taking them to actually rebuild Drupal 8. And PHP 4.0, which some of you may have heard of, was originally going to be a complete rewrite on Symfony full stack. And we actually had to abandon that plan because we realized that in 3.1, we were gradually integrating all the Symfony components and rebuilding and refactoring parts of PHP on the Symfony components. As opposed to actually rewriting, it was never going to happen. So you can see continuous improvement, and every single step you do, every single page that you change over, every single part of your application that you change over and convert to your new site, you can deploy it straight away. If I went and converted over the showcase of the PHP website tomorrow, I could immediately have that deployed. I wouldn't have to then wait for the rest of the website to catch up. However, there is one problem with this, and that's that you have to run 2 websites at once. This can be done a variety of ways. We did it with a really simple script like this. It checks it in a certain directory if the file exists. If it does, it serves it. We check in the Symfony web directory for assets and whatnot. If it's there, again, we throw it. If not, then it goes through to the front controller. Front controller handles all of the errors just exactly like it does in your normal Symfony application. If the page is not found, it's always going to go through to that front controller, and that front controller will then handle the 404. This is probably the most important part of our entire project, was getting this working. And it actually took quite a lot of work to get this very simple script to work. And without it, we would not have been able to rewrite the website. PHP is an open source project, so we don't have any full-time developers working on the website. And the whole process, I've been working on updating the website for a couple of years now, and it's still not finished. If it was still an unfinished project sitting in a repository somewhere, then chances are it would never get finished. And if you're working in a company, again, as I said earlier, you can't maintain 2 websites at once. It's simply not practical. Number 2, planning, 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 planning. When you decide that you need to rewrite your application because of all your spaghetti code or your legacy architecture, you need to create a master plan. decide on your infrastructure, decide on what different libraries you're going to use. And the thing is, this is something you can't skimp out on. You've got to do it right. This is something you've got to do right the first time. You're being given a huge opportunity by being able to rewrite your entire website. You can go over every single line of code. You can make sure that everything is up to your current standards, and you can make sure that everything is done exactly the way you want it to be. It's not an opportunity you want to miss. Goes back to what I was saying earlier. Just pare it down until it's a beautiful thing, until you can hand in, probably late. This also links back into the planning. Ignore exactly what I just said. That plan that you just made, it's by no means a hard plan. You need, when you're actually rewriting your application, you need to be prepared to change. You need to be prepared to go off your intended course. If you are stuck on your existing course and you're saying, no, we're going to do it this way because that's the way we've planned it, then you're going to miss out. As I was just saying, this has to be perfect. You want to make it perfect. You don't want to make mistakes simply because wasn't how it was in your original plan. Plan is really, really important, but that doesn't mean that you have to stick to it. Drupal, when they were upgrading to Drupal 8, as they were developing, the content management framework came out, and they had a pages bundle, I believe. I don't actually believe Drupal is using this, I'm just using it as an example. If they had if that had perfectly suited their purposes, they could have quite easily picked it up. However, if they stuck at their original plan, they wouldn't have been able to take advantage of that. You've got to, the entire development world is continuously expanding. There are new projects coming out every single day. Some of them are really, really exciting, and it's not worth missing out on them. Use this opportunity as best as you can. Number 4, who uses GitHub? I'm really glad at that show of hands. Pull requests and code review is a really, really vital part of GitHub Flow. Who uses pull requests in their teams or for open source projects? Slightly less hands, but we'll work with that. You want to have your application as best as you can possibly have it. Now, no one developer is perfect. There is not a single developer on this planet that could develop thousands of lines of code and not make a single mistake. Whether it's leaving out a semicolon at the end of the line, which I seem to do on a regular basis, I don't use an IDE, or it could just be that you see a different way and you don't think of a way of doing something. You might accidentally have your code too tightly coupled, and someone could actually suggest that you break it out. And you might simply not have thought of it, or you might have just been developing away, and and you thought, I can do that later, and you forgot. Code review is really, really important because you, as a general, you are only one person. Code review means that you can be many people. Many people put together in one task. But if you're going to follow this, then it means you can't review your own and merge your own pull requests. And some people disagree with me on this with regards to merging your own pull requests. But if you're merging your own pull requests, then what's the point in having the pull request in the first place? The whole point of the pull request is so that other people can review your code. And if it's not to the stage where someone else is willing to merge your pull request, then why should you be willing to merge it? Because there's obviously something wrong with it. My 5th point. Begin as you mean to go on, and go on as you began. Some of you may have heard a slightly different version of the word stop. This is the original, and it was originally a priest that said this in regards to religion. But I think it applies to many, many situations, especially this one. You want to have a really, really clean website, and you want to keep it that way. You want to have your an application that is easy to maintain. You want it to be scalable. You want to have it exactly perfect. Start as you mean to go on. And that means using the tools that you intend to use right from the very beginning. Don't start off with developing your half of your application and deciding, actually, we'd quite like to have a test suite. We quite like the idea of having our code tested for us. Start with your test suite in the beginning. There is absolutely nothing wrong with it, and it makes life so much easier. Who's used Scrutinize before? Or SymfonyLive's Insights? For anyone that hasn't, these are static analysis tools. And what they do is they go through your code and they tell you basically what's wrong with it. Sometimes you can disagree with it. But the thing is, what they do is they provide, we're all only human. Even after code review, there are still things that we're going to miss. We might miss a coding standards violation, or we might miss the fact that there's a variable declared that's simply never used and it's completely pointless. This solves that problem. It reviews your code right from the very beginning. And if you integrate this halfway into creation of an application, then it ends up looking a little bit like this. That's quite a low score. The actual current PHP website is about 9.8. And there are some there's a little bit of red here, which is not good. Apparently it's actually security problems, but they're not. This is a screenshot from Scrutinizer. It gives you a review of your code quality. It takes numerous things into account, such as critical path analysis, lines of code, how long your methods are, and any issues with your code. And it puts it into a number, and it tells you basically how good your code is. And you should try and do everything you can to try and get that number up. It also does other things, such as tells you exactly what's changed in pull requests, which is quite helpful. SymfonyLive's Insights, this one, it actually gives you comments in line as to what the problem is. So for example, here it's saying that the bind has actually been depreciated. And that's something you might not have realized because it still works. But this will point it out for you. This is something that Scrutinizer can do that you are very unlikely to do yourself. This is SymfonyLive's Insights. Again, ignore the security, they're not really. It shows you a number of areas in the exact same way. It shows you exactly where your problem is in code, and it tells you how to fix that problem. PHP Unit and Travis Continuous Integration. Who's used either one of these tools or both? Even better. As I was saying earlier, you really, really need to use, and you don't have to use PHP Unit, that's just an example. And again, Travis, there are so many other continuous integration tools that you can use. PHP Unit, you can use other things. You can use Behat, you can do behavior-driven development and whatnot. But the thing is, if you use these from the start, it makes your life so much easier. I can tell you that writing tests for an application that has been around and you're writing tests for the entire application, it's not nice, it's not enjoyable, it's not motivating in any way. Writing tests for PHP, which is an absolutely huge application, is a real chore. Writing tests for the PHP application is really, really easy. We've done that right from the very beginning, and we actually still have about 95% code coverage because of it. This is, for anyone who hasn't used Travis before, this is just a sample of what Travis looks like. So it runs PHP Unit, but it can also do provisioning and whatnot for you. But you can also run your own custom checks and stuff. So here you can see we're actually using the SymfonyLive security checker just to double check that we haven't got any security vulnerabilities that have slipped in. And again, we lint all of our PHP files and we check for and we lint our Twig files as well. Who uses a profiler at the moment? That's what I was expecting. Who's heard of the Quafu profiler? And who's heard of the SymfonyLive profiler? Both of these tools actually are currently still in private betas. However, I do hope that you will go home and sign up for those private betas, and that when they then open up, you will hopefully have a go at these tools. I haven't used SymfonyLive's profiler. I don't know anyone that has, and I don't know how many people have actually been invited. However, I can speak for having used Quafu, and using that from quite early on in certain applications development means that as soon as as you're actually developing, you can see the bottlenecks in your application. You can see what's slowing down your page load. And doing this right from the very beginning, sorry. And doing that right from the very beginning makes it so much easier to actually make those changes before you become accidentally locked into certain things. And you've done a whole load of code a certain way, and suddenly you realize you actually need to refactor it to make it a lot faster. This is what Quafu looks like. So it will give you, has transactions, so different pages, and it can give you information and traces on those different files. This is still very much in a private beta. They're still continuously adding new things. There have probably been new features added since I made this screenshot a couple of days ago. My sixth point, the actual conversion of parts of your website. You want to convert it bit by bit. And I've already said this, but it's possibly the most important part of rewriting it. Do it bit by bit, but don't copy yourself. The whole point of this process is you're rewriting your application, which if you then go and copy all of the code that you already have, then you're losing that opportunity because you're just copying your code and turning it into a Symfony application. Whilst yes, you may be able to take advantage of some Symfony features, you're not going to be able to take full advantage of all of them. Not to mention the fact that you will still have lots and lots of old legacy code with horrible dependency trees, and it will still end up being spaghetti code, just a bit object-orientated. If you do have to copy anything, which will of course happen if you're copying a page's content in the HTML files, or if you're still using the same site design, which at PHP we've done the same thing, we had to copy the site design across. You can use this opportunity as you're copying stuff across to review and refactor every single line of code. You're doing it bit by bit, which means that it's not a huge job of having to review 20,000 lines of code or however many lines of code you actually have in your application. You're only having to review them bit by bit. So it's very, very easy to review every line. And even if it's just a line, which is just a bit of text in a template, there are going to be typos on everyone's website. The other thing you can do is when you're actually converting it, don't just convert it as it is. You've just started using Symfony, which means that you're also using Composer, and you're also using auto-loading. And this means that you can take advantage of so many newly available features to you that weren't available before. You can use, there are so many helpers and classes that Symfony provide for you that just simply help you develop, as opposed to having your own validations library. You can use Symfony's, and it's probably going to be a lot more extensible than your own. And if it's not, then I'm sure you can submit an issue or a pull request to actually add those features to the validator component. Not everything needs converting. Just use a library. It'll also speed up the process. Infrastructure. This is something you need to consider from quite early on, and that's what you're actually going to be building your new application on, because this will affect a lot of your design decisions. However, if you're doing it the way that I've suggested of running 2 sites at once, this can be quite difficult. In that, if you're having to write, if you're keeping them both on the exact same server, you can only run, generally, one PHP version. Sometimes you can do it with running different ones, but that's beyond the remit of this talk. So generally, you want to find a PHP version that the most recent version of PHP that your old application will still work with. And if possible, even just change some of the and update some of the bits in your old legacy application to work in the new PHP versions, so that you can then ultimately, you should be aiming for the highest version possible, which at the moment is PHP 5.6, and probably be PHP 7, not for long. Never mind PHP 6. And when you're actually working on this, you want to be aiming for the highest version possible, so you can take advantage of those features, traits, namespaces. And even in 5.6, they added a new password hashing system. Your databases. This is something that is really, really important, and it's something you need to have in the back of your mind. Whilst you obviously need to abstract things, and if you were listening to Jacob's talk earlier this morning, then you'll have heard him talk about how you shouldn't just rely on having a single database system. However, when you're rebuilding your application, it's still something that should be in your mind, because you need to be doing that in parallel, especially if you're deploying every single step of the way. And your web server doesn't make so much of a difference, but it is still quite important, especially in some applications. So a few big don'ts, and I've already mentioned them, but I'm essentially reiterating over them. don't do it all at once. If you do it bit by bit, you have so many advantages, and the chances are your application will get finished, or you will at least have some of your code converted over. Even if you end up then running 2 sites, you're not duplicating your content across 2 sites. They are 2 individual sites, and both of which will not have the same workload. And your workload in both will decrease as, it will decrease in your old application and increase in your new application as you gradually move things over. There is no disadvantage to doing it all at once. There is no advantage to doing it all at once, sorry. Big don't. And don't do it as soon as possible. Many of us work in enterprise environments, work for companies, and there's this big thing called deadlines, which developers hate. It's well known if you like deadlines. Well, yes. This is really, really important. If you're doing your application, you're trying to do it as soon as possible. This is not the way you should be doing it. If you want to do it as soon as possible, then you're going to be skimping on things. You're not going to be doing it. You're not going to be using your opportunity to rewrite as well as you possibly can. When you write that plan, don't account for, say, I can rewrite the website in 1 year, because that'll be easy, and I'm sure we can do it. I'll do all the static pages in a month, and then I'll convert this application over then, and then I'll convert this application over. If you do it bit by bit, and you do it slowly, do it steadily. If you do it steadily, you will do it so much better, and you will be able to take much more advantage of the features you're actually using. Deadlines are horrible. Big don't. So, any questions?
Hi, good talk. Could you just let us know which order you actually did the conversion in? For example, did you do twig first, or what in the conversion, and why you chose that, and whether you would choose it again?
As I sort of detailed earlier, what we actually did is we had 2 separate sites running. We had our new Symfony site, which was actually running on Symfony full stack, and we had our old site, which was still running on PHP. The one part of duplication we did have was actually in the template, and that was the fact that our overall header and footer needed to be in both applications. But what we did is we converted over a page at a time. Initially, when we first deployed it, we had the home page and the about page and a couple of other static pages that were converted over. The only page that has to be converted over when you do this is your home page, and that's because of the way that we had our system that checked and the 2 different websites worked. If you did it a different way, then that would be fine. But so we actually converted over page by page, and now we're actually working on changing over larger parts of the site. I'm currently working on moving over our downloads page, which sounds a lot easier than it actually is. So we didn't convert all of the twig over and then all of the other bits and bobs over. We converted over page by page, so we were still running both at once. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Going alongside with what he said, did you have any kind of database in the previous website?
Yes, we did. It was running on PHP, okay, which, being a forum, requires a database.
Yeah, so normally when you have your spaghetti code, you also have your database, which can be a little bit mirroring that spaghetti. How do you transition your database into Symfony in that case? A majority of our website actually doesn't rely on our database. The parts that rely on it are generally the larger scripts, which we're actually converting over at the moment. The way we're doing that at the moment is using conversion scripts on individual parts of the website, which then convert it over to the new table structure. And we actually run 2 separate databases in the effort that hopefully they won't ever interfere with each other. We have one database for all of the Symfony work, or the new Symfony site, and we have one database that holds the old PHP site. And ultimately, we're always going to keep those 2 databases, because the second database runs PHP, and we're still intending to essentially keep those 2 applications running, in a sense, forever. However, it will become a lot easier in time with PHP changes over to the Twig templating engine. We can use all of the, we only have to have the templates once, and we can change them in one place, and they'll change in both. But yeah, so we're just converting over individual tables that are relevant to the parts of the application that we're doing, and we're putting them into the new database
deleting them from the old one. With regards to sessions integration, which is currently a large challenge which we're actually going through at the moment, the reason that sessions is such a huge challenge is primarily because of the way it's actually written in PHP. It's not written in such a way that it is trivial to share sessions and share authentication and authorization for different things. So we're actually working on that at the moment. Because that's required for quite a lot of our scripts. So does that help? I will make one point. The actual the PHP homepage, which actually runs on our Symfony site, it actually has to integrate with. It does actually use PHP's database. It does have a connection to the PHP old site database, simply because we actually show our announcements on our homepage. And that is obviously in the old database, and there's nothing much we can really do about that. We don't want to replicate that data. It's easier to connect to the old database, and unfortunately PHP doesn't actually have an API as such that would allow us to easily get those posts without having to actually just go straight into the database, it being the easiest way to do it.
Any more questions?
Sorry.
I'm not seeing anybody. Right, then I think, thank you, Michael,
Okay,
for sharing your experiences with us.